This is Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Kerry-Ann Williams. I'm a psychiatrist practicing here in Massachusetts, and this is a podcast that's about everything related to mental wellness in the Black community and beyond. When is the last time that you revealed your inner self through art? Today, we're going to be talking about just that. My guest today is Daniel Callahan. Daniel is a multidisciplinary artist, designer, and cultural activist living and practicing in Boston. He merges various disciplines, including film, photography, painting, performance, graphic design, music, and writing. Daniel seeks to create immersive experiences incorporating story, ritual, and the human form to explore aspects of resilience, reconciliation, and mysticism. Daniel and his work have been featured in the Museum of Fine Arts, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and the Institute of Contemporary Art here in Boston, as well as the New Orleans Museum of Art and the Queens Museum, as well as in several publications. So welcome to the podcast, Daniel.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So how long have you been an artist?
I think I've been an artist for as long as I knew what that word meant. Probably even before then. Always grew up drawing. My father introduced me to drawing, and what I loved about it was a way for me to sort of interact with my world. I was kind of a shy kid, so drawing was like a beautiful way for me to observe, to interact, and to understand the world around me.
Awesome. So now I'm curious to know a little bit more about your story and what art does for you.
Sure. My story. Where do I begin? I mean, in terms of I'll answer the second question first, I think, because maybe that'll help. So what art does for me, again, like I was saying, it helps me just to understand and to, I guess, use my emotions and my observation to really kind of better understand myself and my world. So, a great example is the drawing, because in drawing, when you're observing something, you're observing it, but then you're putting your observation into a physical format. You're putting it into a drawing. And then when you have that drawing, you then have this document of your understanding of a thing. And it's like another level of understanding. This world there's so much going on in this world, it can be overwhelming, but to be able to focus that in a way to create something new and to learn how to bring what is inside of your mind out into a physical format is really fulfilling. And then also by taking what's inside and putting it out, you then have a record of what's inside. And so you learn more about yourself.
Yeah. It's funny, as you mentioned that, it makes me remember when I decided that I was going to try to start painting. And I bought one of those Learn to Paint books where they basically have they have this like finished product painting. Then they show you the steps. And so they'll say, okay, this is about like maybe 6 different steps and you're supposed to kind of paint it the same way. But they only tell you like, here's a color you should use, here's a brush. And then try as best as possible to kind of mimic it. And so I remember trying to draw this very simplified version of like a woman. There's a woman's face. And when I looked at the finished product I did, I said, how is it that the one in the book, the woman looks happy, but the one that I painted, the woman looks anxious. And I'm thinking, I thought I was copying it exactly the way the book said, but the art kind of revealed something that was inside of me, which was anxiety. And I thought it was just so fascinating to me that could happen, that her eyes looked more anxious than the one in the book. Then I thought I was copying it like exactly the same. So you mentioned like observing things in real life and then drawing it, and that it still brings out what's in you, even though you may be drawing something that exists out in the world. Your drawing is still a representation of you and the thing that you're seeing.
Yeah, it's an interpretation. It's your interpretation of reality, and no one's interpretation is the same. So, yeah, we have different ways we make marks. We have different ways of using color. We have different ways of sort of levels of intensity, and it all comes out in the art, which is it's fascinating.
Yeah, it was just amazing. I just didn't expect that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned I guess when I kind of asked you for your bio, you talked about this concept of resilience and reconciliation. And those concepts are very important in the field of mental health,
Mm.
particularly for individuals who've experienced some kind of trauma. Tell us a little bit about how you create immersive experiences that incorporate story and ritual and the human form to explore those concepts.
Sure. Yes. And I remember that I didn't answer your first question, so I'll try to wrap that all in together. So
Okay.
this is like my story and how I approach doing those things. So,
Mhm.
I'm an artist, like you said, a multidisciplinary artist. At one point in time, I was really into music,
Mhm.
and it was when I was into music that I really got sort of introduced to this practice called masking.
Mhm.
And basically, we were doing this music that was very sort of Pan-African and had a lot of different cultural influences in it. Everything from sort of hip hop to reggae to some Fela influences and Bob Marley influences, and we were kind of following the sort of Pan-African route throughout the world and learning from all these different musical styles. And um, we wanted a way to express that visually.
Mhm.
And so we started to throw these sort of parties, and it was like a ball, but we didn't want to do the Victorian thing where people came with masks on their face. So we decided, let's paint the mask on our faces.
Mhm.
And in doing that, we really sort of uncovered this tradition that we realized was practiced by every indigenous group of people on the planet since the beginning of time. And that was sort of a sort of watershed moment. It opened me up to this very human practice
Mhm.
of changing one's visual outer appearance using color and line and shape. And I started to research all those different practices of body decoration, and I realized that they all had their own different ways of doing it. But a few things that were similar about all of them was that these rituals of decoration often happened at major change points in people's lives. So when
Oh.
people were changing from, say, being single to being married, or from being a farmer into a warrior, or from going from being a child into an adult, there would be
Mhm.
these rituals where they would again change how they looked so that they could then change themselves, change their
Mhm.
realities. And I found that so powerful. And through the process of me sort of going into that, I kind of ran into a wall with the music making, and
Mhm.
kind of got burnt out. Moved. I was in California. I moved back home to Boston, and I was very much in a bad place. I was depressed. I was anxious, and I was having this sort of crisis of identity in terms of like,
Mhm.
who was I now that I wasn't this musician, which who I thought that I would be, I was going to be. And through that kind of crisis of identity, I came back to this tradition of masking.
Mhm.
And I sort of use it as a diary. And so as we were sort of developing this art form, we kind of came up with these, I wouldn't call them rules, but just sort of ways of doing it. And the first rule was that I wouldn't ever do the same mask twice.
Mhm.
Because the idea was that each mask is really supposed to reveal where I am in the moment.
Mhm.
And since I'm always changing, we're always changing, the mask would change as well.
Mhm.
And the idea was just, in using my own face as a canvas, I was not making music, and I wanted to get to something very basic, something very tangible, tactile. And so I used my own face as a canvas and started to process the feelings I was feeling in a visual way. And that was my first project, which is called Month of the Mask, where I used
Mhm.
my face, and every day for a month I would create these masks,
Every
and
day
then I
for a
would
month.
every day for a month. It became a month-long sort of meditation. Um, and this was, I had never done anything like this before. I was literally doing nothing except waking up, reflecting, processing, thinking, and then translating that into some visual form onto my face. And
Mhm.
it would take me the whole day. I would also create these sort of video vignettes around sort of what I was going through, what I was thinking and feeling. And
Mhm.
then I would upload that online and then go to sleep and then wake
Mhm.
up the next day and do the whole thing over. And so it was very much sort of a departure from, my everyday life. And through that process, I learned so much about myself, about my world, about my spiritualness, about my connection to all things. And it was, yeah, it was transformational for me. And so I knew that I was onto something, and this was something important, and that I couldn't just keep it to myself. And so, in addition to sharing what I was doing with other people, I then started to share the technique with other people. And at
Mm,
first, I started to mask other people,
mhm,
and to uh, use this process of discovery with others. So instead of
mhm,
me going inside and asking myself where I was asking other people where they were, and
mhm,
having these sort of conversations, and then interpreting that on their face, and having
mhm,
them become living works of art. And then that transitioned to me starting to do workshops where I would bring folks together and have them create their own masks and go through that journey themselves. um,
oh,
and then that sort of um, evolved into this mask ball that we started doing again here in Boston. And we've done it twice now. We did it once in 2017 at Hibernian Hall in Roxbury, and then um, we did one this past July in 2022 at the Arnold Arboretum, an outdoor one. And
mm,
that one we had over like 15,000 people.
wow.
And the beautiful thing about these mask balls is, in addition to people engaging in this masking art form, if they so choose, we also brought all these different cultural practitioners together to share their craft. Because again, like I said, the this sort of act of decorating oneself is a human experience
Mhm,
that so many different cultures have their own expression of. And so we
wow.
wanted to sort of create a space where that sort of level of sharing and of
Mhm,
multiculturalness was realized. And so we had everything from Japanese taiko drumming to hip hop dancers to Brazilian capoeira. We had several Nipmuc artists. One did an installation in a space. The other did several different sort of dances, and we also had gosh, I'm gonna blank on all the things that we had. We had the Massachusetts tribe come and bless the space through smudging. And we
mhm,
had just this incredible, we had singing bowls, and we had all these different kind of cultural expressions, particularly of people of color here in Boston.
mhm,
And that really sort of was a culmination of the power of what this thing does. And what it does is just allows you to learn more about yourself,
mhm.
and opens you up to learning about other people in a safe way that really sort of sparks your own creativity and uses your
Mhm.
creativity as a method to convene and commune with other people.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And I imagine it's kind of an enjoyable way to do it. And as you mentioned, like people would just have so much kind of enjoyment in that environment, but then they're also having this transformational experience. Um, and just for people that can see the video of this, I'm just going to put this up. The spelling of masking is Masquing. And so that's the term for this art technique. Do you know
Yes.
why the spelling is an alternate spelling?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that. So the main reason is to really differentiate it from our common notion of a mask, our normal mask, mask. Because when we usually think of mask, we think of things that cover our face or hide our identity, or allow us to assume the identity of another. When we think of Halloween, where we wear masks, we become something else.
Mhm,
Um, but the masks that I create are used to reveal, and so they're flipping the notion of what a mask does, not to hide, but actually to reveal and to
mhm.
bring what's inside out. And so I use that alternative spelling to make people think about what a mask is, and also to make people understand that this is not something that you use to hide behind, but something that
Mhm.
you use to share yourself with.
Oh, I've never thought of the idea of a mask revealing,
Mm,
what's on the inside. And when you have these kind of bigger gatherings, are people doing their own face painting, or does someone else do their face painting?
yes, it's great. Another great question. So people were able to do their own, but we also trained a whole cohort of visual artists in
Mhm,
this practice, who would then, mask people in addition to myself,
mhm,
who were coming. And so that was amazing too, to hear from them, because some folks like literally had sessions with people where they were crying at the end. Both of them were crying at the end
wow,
because it was just like so powerful. And I think once you provide that platform for people to share in a deeper way,
mhm,
people really jump at that. People are missing that and they need that. And so it was really beautiful to see that and to see that level of engagement.
And so, when if someone else, if a visual artist is doing the masking, are they asking the person questions, or like how do they? Okay, okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
part of the training is for them to realize that this mask has to be about the person.
mhm,
So it's not just about your own sort of technical skill or
mhm,
even what you see. You
mhm,
have to engage the person. And whenever I do a mask, I do a serious amount of reflection beforehand.
mhm,
And it's through that process of reflection that the design sort of comes into being. And when I'm masking other people, I'm talking with them and asking them questions,
mhm.
and through that process, one, it gives me a chance to look at their face without it being awkward. Um, but also, it's, I'm listening to the responses and the stories they're telling. And it's not always a one-to-one correlation where if they tell
Mhm,
me one thing, I paint it on their face. It's more
mhm,
just we're getting in, we're sharing with each other, and in them opening up to me, I start to see things on their face, and I start to, sketch things out, and then I proceed to mask them.
mhm.
But yeah, it's very much sort of, I never pre-plan my masks when I'm masking other people because it is
Mhm.
supposed to be revealed through the process.
Wow. No, so you mentioned also something that that kind of stuck with me, that traditionally sometimes this masking is done during periods of transformation, when people
Hmm.
are kind of having some kind of transition in their life. And so it makes me wonder, and I think you also mentioned that, um, people can maybe consider even asking to have events. So is there a way that someone, say, for example, if a graduation gathering or some transition like that, they may say, gosh, I would love to have a masking party, or a masking
Mm.
event. Is that something that people can do? If they do that on their own, or do they contact you?
Well, I mean, the technology is open source. Like I didn't
Mhm,
invent this,
mhm,
and I certainly am not trying to own any of this. Anyone at any point in time can start to do this on their own. But I
mhm,
think what I bring is a particular way of approaching this,
mhm,
that that I found is successful in really sort of getting to a deeper place. Because there is just straight up decoration, and there is the tradition of face painting, which we often think about in Western countries, as what we do in fairs, where I want a flower and they paint a flower, and that's beautiful. It's wonderful,
mhm.
like, but that's another reason why I don't call what I do face painting, is because it's what I do is not really that, and I wouldn't want people to be disappointed because
Right.
when I mask somebody, I actually don't take requests. I talk with you, and then what I see is what I then interpret. So
Mhm,
it's just a different sort of dynamic, not better or worse, just different. And so yes, someone could certainly do that, and someone could also reach out to me, if they were thinking, well, I would love for you to, have host a masking event, because then I could walk people through, the way that I approach it.
mhm,
Um, yeah, so I have not gotten requests for that. I have gotten requests for
mhm,
individual masking sessions with people, like
mhm.
one-on-one masking sessions, and I think to start off, that's usually best. And I also um, suggest that when people do this, that they first do themselves first before they do anyone
Oh,
else,
oh,
so that it's the self-knowledge that helps open you up to understanding other people. And so
yeah.
having that journey for yourself, and confronting yourself is really important before you would try to do that with anyone else.
Oh, it seems like it's such a powerful technique. And again, coming from a psychiatrist, that it's sometimes difficult for people to say things in words. It's difficult for
Yeah.
people to express certain things verbally. And so art is just one of the most powerful ways for people to really not only communicate, but as you mentioned, like sometimes there's actually a transformation that happens, or a catharsis even, and you see the tears flowing because they've been able to express something that's almost been trapped inside of them that they couldn't express in words. So I think it's an amazing. I think the work that you're doing is amazing. Um,
Thank you.
you also describe yourself as a cultural activist, and I wanted to know a little
Mhm.
bit more about how you kind of express that activism through your art.
Sure, yeah. I wanted to touch on what you just said because I think
Mhm,
it's so
mhm.
true in terms of being able to communicate without words.
Yeah.
Um, because the origin of this iteration of masking for me did come through like crisis. It came through me not being in an emotionally or mentally good place, and me having to use, not having, but choosing to use this in addition to talking with people, in addition to, you know, plenty of love and TLC from family and friends, to sort of get myself to a better place. And the biggest issue I had at the time was that I had for so long expressed myself through music, and I couldn't do that. I couldn't write. I couldn't. No music was coming to me. I had serious writer's block. And so the idea of not being able to communicate is such a form of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it made me, it opened me up to the suffering that many people are feeling when they really can't communicate what they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
They either don't have the words, or you know, they don't feel in a space that's safe enough for them to do that. And so having a way to start to deal with those issues without going to words. There's also, you know, the English language is so limited.
Mm-hmm.
You know, human expression, you know, it's there's so many different ways to feel,
Mm-hmm.
and there's only so many ways to speak. And
Yeah.
so, you know, when you talked before about, you know, traumatic experiences or other things that are so overwhelming that one cannot find the words,
Mm-hmm.
it's sometimes helpful to go through a different approach, you know,
Yeah.
a creative approach, approach where you get to decide how you want to express this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, as African Americans, we've also been, this language has been imposed upon us, you know, like this is
Yeah.
not our, this is not our native language, English, you know, like
Sure.
it is in a way, but in a way it's not, you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
and so being able to tap into something that is a little bit, maybe even predates language, you know, they say the first cave walls were painted, you know, 70,000 years ago, and that before then we were painting on ourselves. We were our first canvases. And so, you know, we're talking way back when most of the languages we know today weren't around. We were
Yeah.
still able to express ourselves. And so I think that's so important about art in general. Um, so yeah, kind
Yeah.
of went off topic there, but you
No,
also taught.
that was amazing. That was a really helpful kind of addition. Yeah.
Mm. But you'd asked me a question and I didn't
About
answer.
cultural activism. Yeah.
Cultural activism. Okay, yes. So, like I was saying before, in terms of the mask ball event, which I think is like a perfect sort of synopsis of this, um, it's using culture and art to transform spaces and
Mm-hmm.
transform lives and transform people. Um, that is the goal. Whether or not it happens every time, you know, we're not perfect, but the goal is, you know, how much can we learn from each other if we were to see each other as works of art, and we were to see each other's cultures as something worthy of celebration, and not something that would divide us, but that would bring us together.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, the cultural activism really comes from one, studying different cultures and seeing different cultures as being valid, having value, and trying to understand those cultures for themselves, and not trying to, you know, evaluate them in any way, but just to learn from different people, and using that to inform even the work that I do, and also providing spaces for people to share what makes them different. I
Mm-hmm.
think we need to celebrate what makes us different
Yeah.
way more,
Yeah.
you know, instead of fighting about it. And so that's part of the cultural activism that I do. I've also, I'm on sabbatical this year, but I also was president of the Roxbury Cultural District,
Okay.
which is a district. It's a designation by the state that basically designates certain areas as being culturally and historically significant.
Oh, yeah.
And Roxbury was granted one of those designations in 2017. And so the body that was assembled to manage that designation is the Roxbury Cultural District. And through that, we've really sort of endeavored to preserve the art and culture that's in Roxbury. We all know that Roxbury is a historically Black neighborhood, and that there is so many historic and artistic cultural treasures in that neighborhood. And so preservation is important, but also it's important to create and build platforms for new artists and emerging artists to continue that tradition of cultural production that is unique to Roxbury. And so those were sort of the two pillars of what we were doing through the Roxbury Cultural District.
Oh, I mean, that's amazing involvement as well. Yeah, Roxbury holds so much history. And I think people sometimes forget that. I mean, because Massachusetts is a very historical place, and we sometimes forget these pockets of areas where you can find gems.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But both in the area, but also in the people. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and the
Yeah.
stories of the people. Yeah, and as Roxbury changes, there's a lot of changes happening in Roxbury. It becomes even more important for us to try to preserve those stories and preserve those, those contributions that are so unique to the culture there.
Now, do you also use film? How do you use film?
Yeah, I mean, all of the mediums I use kind of the same, and it's the same thing as the drawing. It's I use mediums to try to understand this reality, and then once I get some sort of understanding of it, I then try to express it to other people for them to experience. And I try to find the beauty, I try to find the conflict, I try to find the meaning, and once I feel like it fulfills me, I just want to share with other people. And so with film, it's the same way. Film is a medium that has become really one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, method of communication that we have right now. And so understanding that and trying to use that to tell stories that have not been told, or show points of view that haven't been given that light, is really important to me. And so I use film in a variety of ways. Narratively, I use it to tell my own stories, to imagine different things, to imagine different realities, and also to sort of show the drama of life, but also the meaning that we get through going through that drama. And then, in a sort of more documentary approach, it's to really find people and find ways to tell those people's stories, or allow them to tell those stories themselves and share that with the wider community.
Yeah. It's so interesting because with all the different disciplines that you are trained in, the storytelling kind of reveals itself in different ways. And so I
Mm,
just think it's amazing that you can kind of do this in so many dimensions.
mm,
Um, I wanted to, I think people listening might kind of feel sometimes like, well, art is only for trained people, talented
mm,
people, or maybe it requires special equipment.
mm.
What would you say to listeners who might be interested in accessing art in their own lives? How accessible is art in terms of people facilitating their own process, their own healing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't want to oversimplify, but there's that proverb, if you can speak, you can sing. There's the proverb of, if you can walk, you can dance. And art is just something that we do.
Mhm,
I think it's just a human behavior. And so, I think it comes very naturally to people. I think what happens is uh, that I guess born understanding is often beaten out of us, through school, through other responsibilities,
mhm,
through the need to, make money and products and things like that. But I think it's innate in everyone. And yes, I think to do anything well, the more you study, the more you practice, the more you do, the better you'll get at it. And art is no different.
mhm,
Um, However, this need to be good or
mhm,
great is often, really problematic, and really ends up hurting folks in their process. Art doesn't have to be good in
mhm,
order for it to be valuable. The process is honestly more important than the final product, or
mhm,
at least that's how I see it. And I see art not as objects in museums, but as tools, rituals for our better quality living. And so you just doing it is enough, especially if you're getting something out of it, especially if you're getting some sort of level of fulfillment, entertainment, catharsis, like you said, understanding. That's really what it's about. Whatever is created through that process can be enjoyed by others, and that's wonderful, but it's already really done its job if it's brought you to a better place. And yeah, so there's a yes and no. Yes, training is really helpful, and when I do choose a medium, I study. I really study. I went to school for film. I went to school for drawing. I went to school for animation. Um, but that was in the process of me learning more because I wanted to be able to express myself better and have more control of the craft and be able to do more in the craft. It wasn't what initiated me into doing the art. What initiated me into doing the art was my humanity.
Oh, that's really powerful. And I'm glad that you said that, because I wish that someone had told me back in grade school that the process was the most
Mm,
important thing. It's funny because I'm totally all for art in school and in education, but the effects it had on me was, oh, these other 15 students are so much better at this than me. I'll just stick to
mm,
science. And so I
mm,
had already decided so early on that like art is not my thing because these other 10 students are better than me. So clearly I should just stick to biology. And it's
mm,
later on in life that I kind of, when I reattempted like learning how to draw and paint, that I thought, gosh, my finished product doesn't have to look great. I feel great doing this. I feel great
mm.
doing that, just putting the paint on paper, just on canvas, just, sketching something. It doesn't have to look like a Picasso or whatever. It just is, it's helping me with my own emotional process. And I kind of like I feel like I missed out with, someone should have told me that when I was a kid,
Yeah.
maybe then I would have continued to draw or paint, even if I wasn't being graded on it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a missed opportunity, but there's still time. You're still here. You're
There's still
still
time.
here.
It's not too late.
Yeah, yeah. And it's yeah, it is. It's really unfortunate. I think we do a great disservice to our society when we sort of teach people out of being artists, because that's what we need in every field. You need to have that creative imagination, and
Yeah.
that's really what you get through art.
Yeah. Wow. Um, so okay, well, thank you for being on the podcast today. Anything else that you want to say before we wrap up? Any other thoughts about art and revealing your inner self or the work that you do? How can people find you?
Sure, yeah. So people can find me on my website. It's real simple. It's my name, danielcallahan.com. And that will have a lot of what I've done in the past. So you mentioned film. I do have a feature film out. It's called Come On In. You can find it on Amazon Prime. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on many different streaming platforms. I am currently working on a one-man show about my relationship actually with hip hop, which is the music that was my primary what I grew up in, and education. And we talked about education and God, my spirituality, and my relationship with those over time. And so that's something that I'm working on now. The other thing I would mention, in terms of art, I grew up on hip hop, and I was born in the 80s when hip hop was really starting to emerge.
Mhm.
And the beautiful thing about hip hop as a culture is that it was a culture started by people who were unschooled, sort of, traditionally undisciplined in artwork. And
Mhm.
they created their own ways of making art.
Mhm.
And the really powerful thing about hip hop as well is that you were always encouraged to do more than one thing.
Yeah.
You didn't just rap, you didn't just do graffiti, you didn't just break dance. People did all of them. And
Mhm.
that was the expectation. And that's what I've taken throughout my art career. So I've never approached I go by what vision I have in my head, not by what the you know the medium is.
Yeah.
And if it's a new medium that I have to learn in order to get the vision in my head out, then I'll learn that medium. But
Mhm.
I'm not. I don't feel sort of like trapped in any one kind of form. And
Mhm.
I think that's been tough. Because again, to get to certain levels, you do need to really put the work in. But it's also been really wonderful to be able to just move through these different art forms and to learn from each one because they all inform each other.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming on the show.
Sure.
And thanks to our listeners for listening in. You've been listening to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Kerry-Ann Williams. My guest for today was Daniel Callahan, artist and cultural activist. And thanks for listening and have a great week.